That's most folks already know you, but now everyone knows you. So let me start with just one question. How are you doing? Given the context, it's the pandemic, Black Lives Matter. Let's just start that off.
Oh my God. I mean, just no joke. I feel like I'm in a state where I am not processing right now. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Just too much, a lot of stuff happening, yeah, and I'm facing, some people just, I mean, this is a time I think where it's good for people to be kind of especially considerate for their Black colleagues, and um, and when they're not, it makes it a lot worse. And so that happened to me recently. So like, in addition to everything else, it was just kind of, really hard to deal with like white fragility, as we have talked about it. And so that's kind of what's happening right now. And I'm just trying to deal with it. I don't know if that was the answer that you were expecting, but that's really how I'm feeling right now. Except yesterday evening, I took a walk outside in the sun because the smoke cleared a little bit. I'm in California. I'm in the Bay Area, so it's just been fires and smoke, and at least thankfully we don't have to be evacuated, and I'm okay, and my friends are okay. But I just realized like how much I appreciate fresh air and blue skies and just being able to go walk outside even, and being in a pandemic, not being able to do that is just, and this whole thing is, it feels like, yeah, like you're trapped. You can't do anything. So that was nice. Yesterday I did that. So that's kind of how I'm doing right now.
First of all, I'm so sorry, but everything that's going on, I feel the Black community, especially Black women, have so much pressure on them because they've become that go-to person for everyone to unload. And well, you're processing so much yourself. So sending you a big virtual hug from all of us.
Thank you.
With the pandemic and also the fires, it feels like we already had cabin fever, just staying indoors because of that. And with the fire, I'm so glad to see the smoke.
Yeah. I mean, it was nice to just take a walk. I walked my dogs, and they didn't want to walk anymore. They were done with me after a while. I'm like, nope, we're still going. But it was good.
But thank you so much for being so honest and sharing that. Really appreciate it. So can we talk about where it all started? So you're an immigrant to this country, as am I, and this is a nation of immigrants. We seem to forget that. Were you aware of the racism and the issues, the toxic just misogyny in the tech world, academia? Was it something you came in expecting, or was it all a big surprise?
I think the extent of it was a huge surprise. So I was basically raised, my father died when I was 5 years old. I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and in Addis Ababa. But we're of Eritrean descent. I mean, it's just, oh God, that's a whole other thing to be, I don't know. I feel like East Africans right now, there's too much fighting going on by ethnicity. So that I was aware of, that the differences with ethnicity and how that kind of affects your life and how that affects politics and everything. In 1998 we had to leave because there was basically a lot of people of Eritrean descent were just getting deported out of Ethiopia, and there was a war between the two countries. So that's when my family and I had to leave. And so that's when I came to the U.S. I first went to Ireland just because I couldn't get a visa to the U.S. My two sisters had left for the U.S. 10 years ago, right? 10 years before me, right when my father passed away. And so my sisters had green cards at that time. One of them was just, taking a year off in Ireland or something like that. And finally she was able to convince them to get me there for a certain amount of time until I could come to the US. So, and so if this was right now in this administration at this moment, there is no way that I would have been able to do that, right? And we ended up having political asylum. So yeah, so that's kind of how I came. And So I have two older sisters. They're 10 and 11 years older than me, and I was an accident. Like, I like my mom didn't, like try to, I mean, I was an accident. And my name is Timnit. It means wish in Tigrinya. And my oldest sister gave me that name. And both my sisters are electrical engineers, and my dad was an electrical engineer. It's really interesting. He did his PhD. I didn't even know he did a PhD until recently, but he did his PhD in Italy, in Padua, in a place in a Padua University. And I had just given a talk there, and that was actually like my last trip before the shutdown and pandemic and stuff. I had given a talk there and visited all the, my father's dorm and where he stayed and stuff, very much like 50 years ago, or so. But anyway, and then I went to an all-girls school. And so it's really interesting, the stereotypically like a Catholic nun-run all-girls school does not really, I mean, the stereotype is not that it like produces the most independent or like women, but I think all of the women I know from my school, like all my friends and stuff, they don't take crap from any guys, right? So it's very interesting now looking back that like this was not normal, like this was not how it was everywhere, or this was not how it was even everywhere in the country when I was growing up, but that was sort of my upbringing. So there was no kind of feeling of that, girl, you're a girl, so engineering is not a thing, or any of that stuff. There was no feeling of you're black, so this is how you should be, or any of that. But there were other things. So when I went to the States, and I, at an abstract level, I knew about racism. I mean, I read about it, and and genocide and Native, and how this country was created, and Native Americans, and what was done to them and all that, and slavery and segregation. At an abstract level, I knew about it. But I just remember how shocked I was when I came to the States, because the thing that happened is I went to Boston, I was Somerville, Massachusetts, which is kind of around the Boston area. And it's a very liberal, it's supposed to be a very liberal place where all the abolitionists were and all that. And my first day of school, my very first day of school, I didn't know about the American educational system. Like, what does AP mean? What does honors mean? What does standards mean? I was just like, I'll just take standards classes, and like, maybe I won't take AP. That sounds like college level. That just sounds, I'm not going to do that. And then maybe I'll take one honors class or something like that. That's how I was thinking. So then I go to class, and the teacher is like, I remember I went to a chemistry class, and he was describing all the things that they were going to cover that year. And so I was like, oh, I've covered all this stuff though in the school I went to in Ireland. So I go there and I say, hey, can I like move up a level or something like that? And he was like, I've met so many people like you from other countries who come here and they think they can just take the hardest classes here. And you know that if you took these classes and you took the exams, you would fail. You wouldn't be able to take the exams that these people take. And I'm like, this is okay. It's my first day. Like, I don't know you. You don't know me. I don't know what's going on. So that was my first day. And that was like the least of the worst things. It's not the worst thing that happened at all. It was just like the least bad thing that happened. And so what happened was that the most confusing parts for me were it's the fact that people, I think it's kind of Malcolm X's book describes it, right? Like some of his teachers who really genuinely seem that they care about him. Look, like, I don't think you should go to law school. You should try to be a carpenter or something. Like, they're like literally saying that to him, right? Because then they feel like it seems like they're generally concerned about him. that was the kind of stuff that was happening to me. And so I'd tell my mom, like, why would this teacher say that? She's like, it's because you're Black, you're African. They don't think you can do it, this and that. And I would argue with my mom. Now I understand how people argue. I'm like, what's your evidence for that? Mr. Anzalone is a nice man. He's nice to me. Why would he do this? You know? And so over time, I was like, of course, this was the most blatant display of racism I experienced. I mean, it was so many. My mom had to come have meetings. They told me, I remember like my guidance counselor telling me I wasn't going to get into college at all, like any college whatsoever. And so that and then, and then I got into Stanford. And then when I went to say bye to him before, because the quarter system starts late, he asked me if I had dropped out. Cause he was like, I was like, no, I haven't gone yet, And so that was sort of my high school experience. And in high school in the US, you don't learn the right history. It's completely fake history, period. So I wanted to learn more because I'm like, this cannot be the real story they're teaching us in high school. I'm like, that's not my experience. So when I went to college is when I took classes on like civil rights in the 20th century and things like that. And that's when I learned the real history of the US that's not what we're taught here in school. So anyhow, I'm sorry to like go on that question, but that's how it all started. I mean, and so in terms of my interest in its relationship to tech and all that, it's kind of, a lot of it comes from my personal experience too. And then in college, I studied electrical engineering because my dad did it. It wasn't like really something I thought hard about. And then I kind of veered off into other specialties. But that's sort of how this whole thing started. I'm going to stop because I can talk for the whole hour about this. Yeah.
First of all, I should have just we should do an entire day with Timnit, Gebru. We should just have an entire day talk and we can grab wine and just have people join in because your life story is so fascinating. I mean, it's just it's so honest and literally all the gaslighting that happens, the history whitewashing that happens, because you're trying to process, right? A lot of us are trying to process when we are given feedback. What does it really mean? Is that really true? And you tend to believe the feedback. Women do that, right? You get criticism and you're told not to go a certain pathway. And just hearing you say that and validating that it is okay to follow your own path, even though others say no, they may not believe in you. It's so important. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks. I want to say though, it's only possible, I think, when you know there is another path. So what I noticed is that the fact that I was not born and raised in this environment in the US, it was so important. I mean, I came when I was 16, but the years I had without this until I was 16 were so important, right? I don't know what I would have done if I was born and raised in this environment, in this the types of schools that I went to, because from day one, the teachers, society, everything is always telling you something different, and so you've never had a chance to see it a different way. So I am very grateful for that, for the ability to have that, and I feel so much for the people who are born and raised here, who have to, who didn't have that kind of like a different experience, before they entered this terrible environment.
You're spot on. Being an outsider in some way gives you that different perspective because different, you've learned differently. We have this conversation in our household. I have a teenager. We talk about how the educational system just fails the children here. If you really want education and really want to be well informed, you have to go outside the traditional education system because the institutions are just designed to keep the status quo. Yeah. They're not designed to have you go out and think for yourself, make your own decisions, because that would make you an anarchist, which is why you see a lot of Gen Z, they say radical. And a lot of positions that they take on issues that the Gen Z takes are so spot on. They are logical. And just because we see it with a lens from what we've been taught, it's hard to sometimes process that. But couldn't agree more. I do have a fun fact to share with you. You and I have one thing in common. We were both accidental babies. My siblings are 10 years older than me. I was like the brat Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about even beyond this. So let's talk about gender shades. Like that work changed the industry as we know it. What was the inspiration behind it and how did it all get started?
I mean, it was all joy. I wasn't really thinking about face recognition or anything like that. But I, so I was in this program called DARE, Diversifying Academia. Oh man, I don't know what it stands for exactly. Diversifying Academia. I don't know what RE stands for. I forgot, but it's a fellowship. So, um, excuse me. And so during DARE, I met this other woman, Jessica, who is a Rhodes Scholar, and she's South African. And so she was telling me about Joy. She said, oh, there's this, Joy was also a Rhodes Scholar. So Joy sent this email asking, I don't remember, like asking some list about people who have computer vision specialties or something like that. And Jessica was like, you know, the things you're interested in, like you probably want to meet Joy or something like that. So I sent her an email. I'm like, hey, I'm, you know, and so by then I watched some TED Talks that she was giving, like 2015, I think. She was giving some of these talks about how, you know, open source face detection systems weren't detecting her face unless she put on a white mask, but they would detect, you know, her roommate's face and things like that. So by then, I have had my own experiences in terms of how, you know, graduate school, there was no Black people really in computer science or, you know, in this field, and how, you know, going to all these conferences and things like that, like you don't see anybody, and how also I saw a difference in when I started my PhD in this space, at least, versus around that time, there was so much more hype about AI, like everybody was talking about it. It was such a difference, like in a few years. And then I also was starting to read articles about ways in which this technology was being used that I just had no idea. And then the juxtaposition of that versus the people in my vicinity that I talked to when I tried to talk to them about police brutality or something, and how they just did not, you know, like understand it all. Like if I was telling them about an experience I had or something like that, so that whole confluence, I wanted to talk to Joy about it. So I don't remember exactly how it happened, but we met up, we talked, and she asked me if I would be able to advise her on her master's thesis. So this ended up being her master's thesis. And so we would meet, you know, every week, and we would discuss and things like that. And so she wrote a master's thesis that's more extensive than the paper. And then when I was asked to be involved in FACT, the conference that was formerly known as FATSTAR, so it's Conference on Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Socio-Technical Systems. I was like, hey, maybe we might want to take a portion of your PhD, master's thesis and submit it as a publication. So we worked on a publication for a FACT. And so that's basically what happened. That's how it happened. I honestly didn't even think we were going to publish it anywhere else past her master's, because it wasn't the kind of thing, you know, there weren't really venues where you could, and I couldn't even, I remember like, I was still doing my PhD when she was working on her master's, and I just couldn't really tell. I was trying to tell people, I think this was 2016. I was also having my own issues in grad school, but I was trying to explain to people why I thought this was important and why we were working on it. And it just seemed like really difficult to explain. So I just didn't really talk about it. I didn't tell people I was really working on it or anything like that. So that's how it started. That's what happened.
Do you feel validated now that folks are actually paying attention and there being exits by IBM and others from the space? Do you feel the
I
time?
do feel validated, but you know, Joy is very good at, so, you know, you notice when institutions try to take credit, or people try to like really kind of act like they were there from the beginning or something, but that's not how it is, right? Like it was basically, even our institutions weren't like super supportive wherever it is, like where I was at Stanford, she was at MIT, and then I was at MSR, now I'm at Google. So it wasn't really the institutions, it was us who did it. And Deb, excuse me, Deborah Raji was interning at AJL with Joy. And so when they had their follow-up paper, actually, Deb and Joy had this actionable auditing paper. They were so stressed out because of the way Amazon responded. They were having VP after VP attacking them. They were like, these VPs were writing tweets and stuff. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to attack the work, and they were trying to paint them as people who didn't understand the technical parts of the problem, or computer vision or something. And I had to really stop myself from like tweeting back at these people. I'm like, I just want to, you know, and I'm like, no, we can't do that. So we spent a month, me and Meg Mitchell, my co-lead at Google, we spent, so Joy was like, we have to do something, you have to say something and stuff. So we're like, okay, we're preparing something, but it had to be really, really good. It couldn't just, you know, we couldn't get anything wrong. So we spent a month like writing a letter, a response to like how Amazon responded to their work and stuff like that. And we had, we made it enough. So I went to my manager and I was like, so I'm doing this thing and it might get me in trouble with Google, but I'm gonna do it anyways. So what do you suggest? And he was like, well, I suggest that you make it anonymous, make the letter anonymous, and then you write it, and you have, you know, a bunch of people sign it. And so then it's not like you writing it, right? Like you just write it. So Meg and I did that. Like we spent this long time writing the letter, and we made a blog post, we made it anonymous. And then we asked a bunch of people, mostly in computer vision, but other scientists too, to write a letter, to sign it. And then we asked some people if they're okay being the face of a press, like going to the press, because it wouldn't be good for me or Meg to do it, because we didn't want it to be an Amazon versus Google or whatever thing, right? We wanted to be like, here is the research community supporting these women who are being attacked, and we're behind this work. So we did that, and Anima was such a champ. Like she also wrote a blog post, and she was like, I'm gonna, you know, definitely I'll talk to the press. And she was at AWS before too, and she's been so vocal about this. So, you know, yeah, so we had the help of so many people editing this letter. And so that's what we did. And so we were behind them, and it was very hard for them to say anything after that, because we were like, it was very, it was satisfying to like go through. So I remember I copied and pasted what the blog post they were writing was, and like doing a point by point rebuttal. Like I broke up every sentence they wrote, and like a response and citations and whatever for all of them. And that was, you know, that felt good to do. But it's like, it's not like, you know, it was a very difficult journey, right? So that I just pointed that out just to show that it was a very difficult journey. It was very important for all of us to like support each other, and not, you know, and just be happy when one of us is, you know, gaining recognition or something, support each other. And when somebody is, you know, being targeted, to also support each other. So definitely has not been a smooth journey, but like it definitely feels, yeah, it's made a lot of impact. And I have to tell you that Joy is I have learned a lot from her, because a lot of times when I work on research, and it's a mix of her and like the incentive she's in too, I think, is that many times when you work on research, people publish a paper and they just sort of move on to the next thing or whatever it is. And what she was doing was that she was just so focused on the impact of this idea. She wasn't really concerned about the actual paper or whatever. She literally was only really concerned about the impact. So, I mean, she did so much stuff. She made a website with visualizations. She, like, you know, tested Congress. She went to the Congress and testified. Like all art exhibitions around it. Like, there's not a single person who didn't know about this paper because of all the different things she did, right? If you didn't read the paper, well, then there's spoken word for you. Then if you don't know the spoken word, well, there's art for you, right? And so I mean, it's just, I think it's, for me, it's been like a learning experience of when you want to make impact, like how you do it.
I'm just blown away with just her energy. The incredible work that you did. I feel that people only see the highlight reel. They see the output, but the
Yeah.
sweat and tears that goes into actually making this happen. Thank you for just like opening up that curtain, showing us like what it was behind the scenes, because I don't think we fully appreciate sitting here on this side. We just see what's published. We
Oh
don't.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
many. I think the other day I sent, I don't remember, a couple of months ago, I sent joining. I'm like, I'm done with computer vision. That's it. I'm out. I'm done. I'm gone. Finished. And she's like, I get it. Or like, I remember she'd send me, be like, I'm dropping out of my page, you know, like a while back. I'm like, I get it. But, you know, so it's always like that. Like there's and then so much hate. There's also people, yeah, I can, you know what, I can go on, but like it's just a lot. Yeah, exactly. People don't see, you know, you just see kind of, you know, it might feel like, oh, there was this paper and then there's this, you know, result, right? Like, and that's definitely not what it is. That's definitely not the story.
And it took years. You
Yeah,
talked about it started back in 2015, and we're only hearing about it because the work all you did, you kept it in the forefront. Joy is really a force to be reckoned with. I don't know how she does that. She's out there
yeah.
the momentum. She's out there. It's exhausting. I can't even imagine like how you all do it day after day. So let's talk about the role of allies. There's so much pressure, right? Because we're holding up all these amazing Black women up there. We look at them and say, look at all the great work they're doing. It's like, what's the role of allies? Like, because I'm assuming Instagram
Yeah.
Black squares are not enough, tweets are not enough. Like, what are the meaningful ways that we could be supporting you?
You know, I think this is a good question because one of the biggest issues I've had recently is white fragility. And it's actually very painful to have that in this current moment. And so when I was talking to speaking of Reddit, who is also a force to be reckoned with, we were talking and we were saying that it's kind of, that's why it's harder to describe people as allies rather than actions. You know, an individual can have many different actions, some of which are very much the action of an allyship to you, and others of which may not be. And I think the most important thing for allies to do, and this is just because I am experiencing this right now. If you ask me this question next week, I'd probably say something completely different, is to be able to reflect on their own actions. And when you call them out on something, to not be super defensive about it, to not make your life harder because you did that. Because obviously there's something wrong, and obviously that's why we're here. That's why we're having issues. And if everybody assumes that they're not the problem and it's other people that's the problem, and that whatever they're doing, they're perfect, they can't, you know, possibly be doing sexist things, they can't possibly be doing racist things, they can't possibly be creating a bad environment, then obviously like nothing's gonna change. And the biggest change I've seen is when people stop being super defensive and start taking the feedback, because then there's a safer environment for you to be yourself, but also call out things that are not okay. What happened to me recently, like literally I mean, somebody called me, they were saying I was mean and angry and all that, like all this stuff. And I was just like, okay, it could be because you're not in a good place, but also this is the angry Black women stereotype. And also there's like a whole documented thing where white women, like the weaponization of victim, you know, being your victim, right? Like there's this whole thing. So I wrote this whole document with links and all this stuff. And then the person said that I was being racist and sexist towards them. That was like, now I'm telling, this was in like 2 days ago or something like that, right? Right now in this current time of racial uprising. And this is not like someone, and these are people who are very well known for DEI and fairness and stuff. You know, these are not people who, you know, it's same as my experience in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's you know, a liberal city. So it's like, when you mess up as an ally, because you're not perfect. None of us are. There's always dimensions of privilege and marginalization in some form. You can be privileged in some form and marginalized in another form. When someone points out the way in which you're marginalizing them in some dimension, instead of, responding that way, which is awful, because it's now in this current time that we're in, instead of even like collectively grieving, you're also dealing with this specific situation. It's very, very important to take the feedback to heart and not get defensive, because even giving this feedback and being in this kind of environment is already difficult for the person who's doing it. So I think that's what I would say. Self-reflection and self-growth, I think, are the most important things.
I couldn't agree more. It's hard enough to be in the situation that you're in right now with all the pressure, having to also deal with managing someone else's fragility or ego just adds pressure on top of it. And I've experienced that personally as well recently. It's you're aware of what happened with when I called out a panel which was using my work to promote an all-white panel.
Amazing.
I was stunned. I was stunned because it was the organizer took it well, they took the feedback, but the person who was organizing it took it very personally.
Like a personal attack, I know.
Right, and it's not about, it wasn't personal, it was just that given the context and what's happening in this country, which no longer can be ignored, in not just United States, it's all over, right? It's not just here. We cannot say US has a problem and UK doesn't, or Europe doesn't. We are seeing even Germany and other places. To be able to say you're an ally and yet hold that aside and just listen that you can also change, you can actually evolve. I think that's such good feedback for a lot of us.
Yeah, that's happened to me too in panels, like you were saying, calling out panels and stuff and being attacked, like, by people. Yeah, exactly. So now the onus is on you to survive in this environment, call things out, and make sure constantly you're not, you're navigating like other people's feelings and stuff. It's so exhausting. So yeah, that's the number one thing feedback I would say to people.
Thank you. And I completely appreciate that. I love the distinction you've made between you can be marginalized in some ways and privileged in others. It's just recognizing where your privilege can help others and when, at what point should be centering somebody else's issues over yours. Because as being a woman itself, like you can be marginalized, but if you have privilege, you should be using the privilege, not make that situation about you. One of the pieces, shifts we made in the work that we do personally is we are centering the experiences of marginalized communities. So we created this event, especially to showcase, because there's a lot of burden on women like yourself who are out there. What if we were to empower another generation, the next generation rising stars, and bring all these women together to be more supportive and have more of that ally?
Yeah, you're super supportive. I mean, you're always so supportive. I really appreciate it all the time. Like, yeah, and every time I'm going through something, you're like, "Are you okay?" How can I help? I really, really appreciate it. So yeah, more of that from people.
I'm a mommy, so my clients always say your mommy is coming out right now.
Yeah.
So it's always about, are you okay, is the first thing that comes out of my mouth. So yeah, call you. And so we have about 5 more minutes. We could keep this going, and I'm sure everyone in the audience would go like, can we just keep her going all day? But we have to make time for other amazing speakers. One question I have for you is, I'm Indian, food and family is everything. And I think that's a universal concept, right? And during the pandemic, there are only 2 things, your loved ones and food. That's literally top priority, as long as everyone's okay, as long as there's food. Can you talk a little bit more about like Eritrean food? Because I've only ever tried Ethiopian, but I'm just dying to hear like.
As far as I know, as far as I'm concerned, it's basically the same thing. Eritreans have a little bit more, like, I think there's food and there's some other things, additional things, but Ethiopians eat those too. And then within Ethiopia too, I mean, Ethiopia is a huge country, right? It's like 110 million people. And within Ethiopia too, there's different ethnic groups. And so probably the Ethiopian food and Eritrean food that you have in restaurants and stuff, there are like other ethnic groups that don't eat that, right? So, but what I eat, what I grew up eating is the same food that you get in Ethiopian restaurants and Eritrean restaurants. So it's like, so, but like, it's more like certain dishes, Eritreans are known for making it a certain way, or like shiro, Eritreans are supposed to make really good ones, or like, you know, well, so there's also that in Eritrea, there's like 9 different ethnic groups too, and in Ethiopia there's like 80 something. So the Tigrays are one ethnic group that exists in Eritrea and in Ethiopia. Actually, I personally feel like the Tigrays of Eritrea have more in common with the Tigrays of Ethiopia than the rest of the Eritreans, but then they also are the ones who are fighting with each other for a while. So like this is kind of, I think, world history in, you know, in human history in 2 minutes, like, you know, all this fighting and stuff. But yeah, but like I think my favorite food is actually shiro, which is both an Eritrean and Ethiopian food, and it's supposed to be the poor person's food. Like it's chickpeas, and it's but it's so good. Like, you know, I think it's how people, the difference is, you know, when you get the flour, the shiro flour, you know, how people prepare that, and perhaps when you start with a good one, I think that maybe that is what makes it good. It's hard to make bad shiro, but it's hard to make really good one. Like I don't know. So there's this restaurant Zenni that I am in San Jose, in the Bay Area, and I love their shiro. So when many Ethiopians and Eritreans go out to eat in restaurants, they're not going out to eat shiro. Like shiro is not the thing. You're like, hey, let's. Oh, actually, there's at home though. There are specific types of restaurants. You can have a shiro restaurant just for shiro. You can have a kitfo restaurant just for kitfo. There's like places like that. And so yeah, I just love shiro. That's my thing. And it's super healthy. I mean, it's like chickpeas, it's nutritious, it's really good.
Oh my God. Okay. I love shiro. And I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I was sitting in a restaurant run by, when you come out here, I know Reddit is, we have plans. We are going to the Ethiopian restaurant. I live in Oakland.
Yeah.
Oakland, Berkeley has tons of Ethiopian restaurants, and there's one run by a woman. They're all family owned, and she makes the best shiro. And I just sit there and that's all I eat. I'll just go there. That's my comfort food now. And there was a woman who was sitting next to me and she said, "Oh, you really like that?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she said that. She says, "This is peasant food. It's cheap and it gives you a lot of energy." I'm like, "I don't know about that, but I just love it so much." So I'm so happy to hear you say that. I have to, yeah, I can't wait for you all to be out here so we can check it out together. We are right on
I
time.
was looking at all of the chats that people are having. They're having a great time. They're like discussing on chat. I'm like trying to read it and listen to you at the same time. I don't do that very well. I'm not good at multitasking.
That's all right. I'm terrible. I don't even try. But yeah, Barcode is a favorite. Giving a shout out to the amazing woman who runs it. A quick, do you have any words of wisdom? We have Latino women, we have Asian women, we have so many amazing women on the call in the audience with us. What's your advice?
Man, I would say like let's take it easy. let's take care of ourselves. I just think we always have the world's shoulders in our what is it called? My mom always says, "Don't." It's my mom's. I'll tell you exactly what my mom told me. And on my birthday, she said, "Take the night off. Turn the laptop. Turn the laptop off, and don't have the world's problems on your shoulders." So I think right now, maybe that's kind of what I would say. We all just need to take care of ourselves and not feel bad about doing it. Not feel bad about if we're feeling down, because I know, like I was saying, even when I was talking about the fires, I'm like, oh, but you know, I'm fine. Like I'm not evacuated, you know, but it's still not nice to have, you know, smoke outside, right? But I was trying to like sound like I'm not complaining, because, you know, there are people who are losing their homes and they have to be evacuated and stuff like that. So just, but, you know, it's okay to feel down, I think, and it's okay for us to just need to take some time for ourselves. So maybe that's kind of my final words of wisdom.